Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Mark Twain House Museum, at least its virtual existence. I'm Jennifer LaRue. I'm the Director of Public Programs at the Mark Twain House Museum in Hartford, Connecticut, and I absolutely can barely contain my excitement about this evening's program. We're welcoming back three authors who have visited the house in person before. I'll introduce them more thoroughly in a moment, but we're welcoming Douglas Preston, Lincoln Child, and Christopher Rice, who are absolutely delightful, as you're about to find out. I have a little bit of housekeeping to do before I introduce our guests, but before I do that, I want to just say, we've done, since the pandemic began, our first virtual program was in April of 2020. We've done 150 or so of them. This is the largest audience we've had for any virtual program since we've begun. And we, of course, owe that to the popularity of our guests tonight and to the dogged support of people in the audience like yourselves who stick with us through thick and thin. So we're so excited to have you here tonight. And I do want to say, though, one of the things I typically tell you is that we do offer signed copies of the book in question, and you cannot wait to read Bloodless, I'm telling you. We are offering signed copies, and listen, we're no dummies. We know you can get copies of this book elsewhere, but you don't always get a signed copy. However, we had no idea that, 524 of you and counting were going to register for tonight's program. We're delighted to have you all with us. But I do want to say that it's going to take us a little bit of time to get these signed copies out the door to you. We're very short-staffed these days, and it's a process of putting the signed book plates in the books. We actually have to order more copies of the book because of this great turnout. So please do be patient with us and know that we will get your book to you as quickly as we possibly can. And thank you for your support through that purchase. A few little housekeeping things. So we are on Crowdcast, which is the virtual platform that we've been using from the very beginning. You're already using the chat. I'm really thrilled to see you doing that. That's one of the really fun things about virtual programming versus in-person programs, where you're really not supposed to talk during the program. So you guys go ahead and keep on chatting. Let us know where you're from. Let us know what your favorite Preston Child book is. Let us know anything you want to tell us about yourselves. And also maybe put a little bit of whoop whoop in the audience for being part of this huge audience tonight. So do that. However, toward the end of our program, Doug and Link and Christopher have agreed to do a audience question and answer session. So if you have a question for any of the three of them, rather than put it in the chat where it might be hard for me to find, if you could do me the favor of putting it in the ask a question area that you see at the bottom of your screen. There are already 8 questions there. You're an enthusiastic bunch. That'll make it a lot easier for me to moderate the Q&A session toward the end. So thank you so much for that. I want to let you know about another feature of the Crowdcast, which is that big green button that's right underneath my face that says your support is vital to the Mark Twain House Museum. Truer words were never spoke. We are very pleased at the Twain House that after having had be shuttered for a good portion of the pandemic, we have been offering our guided house tours again. I was over at the house today, and there are people there in droves. People are coming to visit Mark Twain's house like crazy. But we have been without that major source of revenue for a good part of the pandemic, and we've been relying really on the generosity of people like yourselves who are willing to click that button and share whatever you're able to share with us in the way of a donation. So that continues. We are facing uncertain times now with the Delta variant, and who knows what's going to happen. We're planning our first in-person program on October 5th with the historian Nathaniel Philbrick. So we're excited about that, but we're kind of feeling our way through this, and we're so very proud to have been offering these virtual programs throughout the entire pandemic, keeping engaged with our audience and with people out there who love Mark Twain and love books and writing. So we're thrilled to be doing that, but if you can help us continue that, we're very, very grateful to you if you do. I want to note that today's program is sponsored by the Wish You Well Foundation and by Connecticut Public, WNPR, and it's produced in part with support honoring the legacy of Frank Lord. So now I want to introduce our guests. I'm going to start with Christopher Rice, who's a New York Times bestseller since his first publication at the age of 22. He's the author of Bone Music, an Amazon Charts bestseller, and the first novel in the Burning Girl series, and its sequels Blood Echo and Blood Victory, along with Bram Stoker finalists The Heavens Rise and The Vines. His second novel, The Snow Garden, won a Lambda Literary Award, and there's so much else to say about him. He visited the house with his mother, Anne Rice, in 2014. We're just thrilled to have him with us and grateful to his help moderating tonight's conversation with Douglas Preston, who's published 36 books of both nonfiction and fiction, of which 29 have been New York Times bestsellers. He's the co-author with Lincoln Child of the Pendergast series of thrillers. He writes about archaeology and anthropology for the New Yorker magazine, and he worked as an editor at the American Museum of Natural History in New York and taught nonfiction writing at Princeton University. He currently serves as president of the Authors Guild, the nation's oldest and largest association of authors and journalists. Doug is a very good friend of the Mark Twain House, as is Lincoln Child, the co-author with Doug of such highly acclaimed thrillers as Crooked River, Old Bones, Verses for the Dead, Cabinet of Curiosities, and Relic, the latter two of which were chosen by an NPR poll as among the 100 greatest thrillers ever written. That's something. He's also published 7 thrillers of his own, most recently the Jeremy Logan books Full Wolf Moon and The Forgotten Room. 26 of his joint and solo books have become bestsellers, 3 of which debuted at #1 on the New York Times list. He lives in Sarasota, Florida. So everybody, please join me in welcoming to the Mark Twain House and Museum, albeit virtually, Christopher Rice, Lincoln Child, and Douglas Preston. Thank you for being here with us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for those introductions. Right.
Yeah, who are these very distinguished people? I don't know them.
So she gave us the direction beforehand that as she was introducing us, we should just nod. But I also started to blush a little. I don't know if I'm still young enough for that to show up on camera. But it's wonderful to be here with you guys. I'm a little cracked up because we did a tech run through yesterday, and we did the pajamas and snacking version, and then tonight when the screen opened we all looked ready for school pictures. So I think that's wonderful, and Jennifer did a good job of sort of framing the new book here, but this is what we're going to be talking about this evening mostly. This is Bloodless. This is number what in the Pendergast series? Help me out. Which number in the series is it?
20.
20. It is book 20. I told you this when we gathered yesterday. I said typically when you agree to moderate an event like this, they always offer to send you the book in advance. And if you're on a busy writing schedule, you say, "Oh, absolutely, send me the book." And I was fans of yours already and had read previous installments in the series. And I said, "Well, I'll read as much of it as I can get through before we do our event next week." I picked it up on Friday night. The world fell away. I canceled plans. All I did was dive into this book. I finished it the following day in the afternoon. I'm being very cautious because it evolves into a type of story that I absolutely love. But if I say what type of story that is, I will spoil a major reveal in this book, which I absolutely don't want to do. But I think the thing that I am most interested to talk to you guys about, the writer in me, wants to know about how you two nurture a new idea in the context of your partnership. Because as I was reading this, the launching point for this book is the very real story, mystery, I should say, of D.B. Cooper, who hijacked a plane, parachuted out of it, and was never heard from again. And the opening chapters very elegantly, and I believe accurately, lay that mystery out for us. So I was picturing one of you on your sofas, either streaming or channel surfing, History Channel, coming across a special on D.B. Cooper, picking up the phone, calling the other and saying, "Our next Pendergast book's going to be about D.B. Cooper." And then the other one says, "It's 3 a.m. Why are you calling me?" You know, is that how you guys begin, or is the first spark? Does it take a different form?
No, that is how we began. What happened was I've been fascinated with the D.B. Cooper hijacking ever since I was 15, which is when it occurred in 1971. And it's an incredibly interesting story. It's the only unsolved skyjacking in American history. And as he was paid, he collected a ransom of $200,000. He parachuted out into the night over the great forests of Oregon, or possibly even Washington State, and disappeared. And nobody knows what has happened to him, although there are all kinds of stories. But in 2000, a young kid who was fishing with his father went digging for worms on a sandbar in the Columbia River and uncovered a mass of rotting money. And the serial numbers matched the D.B. Cooper ransom. And what's interesting about this is that this is very, very far from where they think he jumped. But anyway, I've been absolutely, interested in this story. And at a certain point, I called up Lincoln and said, "Look, what do you think? Can we write a novel that tells, that figures out what happened? What happened to D.B. Cooper? Who did he become?" And so we started brainstorming, and I'm going to turn it over to Link because he came up with some outrageous ideas, which were incorporated into the novel with great effect.
Thank you, Doug. I'll be happy to explain. Although first I should say that having heard the news about the size of the crowd has paralyzed me with fear, and I may not be able to continue. So if you see me sink out of sight, you'll know why it is. And also correct Christopher about lounging on my sofa watching TV. I spend 20 hours a day in a monk's cell on a bed of nails, meditating about the writing I have to do. But those two things out of the way, when it was Doug who approached me about D.B. Cooper, who I'd actually, if I'd ever heard of, it had been in the mists of time. We already had an idea that our next Pendergast novel was not going to take place in Florida like the last two had. And we knew it wasn't going to take place in New York either, because if it did, that would mean that we would lose his new partner, Coleboon, who was with him in the last two books and who was desperate to get to Denver. So the only way we could figure out to move the story forward was to have them stop against both their wills in Savannah at their boss's insistence because of a new case involving these bodies that were turning up in Savannah, drained of every last drop of blood. And of course, in a place like Savannah, which is probably the most haunted city in America, that began to elicit stories and worrying about the Savannah Vampire. And Doug and I, having both been there, knew Savannah was perfect. And it was a way for us to keep Pendergast with Coleboon for a while. It was a way to find a whole new place for him to solve a mystery. The only problem was, how are we going to fit D.B. Cooper in with 2021? And Doug came up with the idea for D.B. Cooper, and I have to say he also came up with the final insane solution. Insane in a good way.
But wonderfully insane, though. Wonderfully insane solution, yes. I have to say.
Yes.
Yeah. So if I'm getting the chronology correct here, what you already had in the queue was a story that you knew was going to be kind of geographically transitional for your main characters. You knew that they were going to have to stop in Savannah. So did the D.B. Cooper idea come second, or did they sort of arrive at the same time?
Well, the D.B. Cooper idea actually came second. It was Link's idea. I mean, both Link and I are huge fans of Savannah. We love it. It's one of the most interesting, unique cities in America. It's got this wonderful Gothic, dark history and flavor to it, the crooked streets and the buildings and the beautiful squares and so forth. So we knew we were going to set our novel in Savannah. So the D.B. Cooper thing came later. And then, as Link said, we were like, how are we going to fit these two things together? I mean, D.B. Cooper happened 50 years ago. This is the 50th anniversary, or Thanksgiving of this year will be the 50th anniversary of that hijacking. And, I don't know. We just came up with this absolutely demented solution.
But it's wonderfully demented, which I can't say enough. So when it comes down to the division of labor, all right, you guys you've got the idea. The two things are sort of going together. Link, they do then turn to Doug and say, okay, you better do all your DB Cooper research because you're the one that saddled me with this guy. I'm going to let you do the DB Cooper stuff. I'm going to go nose around in these topics over here. How does it sort of start to shake down as you begin the plotting of the thing?
That's a very shrewd question because it really gets to the root of our writing partnership. A lot of people assume that, after we get a half-baked idea or even a fully baked idea, that we wander off and Doug writes chapter 1, I write chapter 2, he writes 3, 4, right. So on. That would be a disaster. What happens is we each take a sequence or a character or a meta event, and we work on that separately, trying, now that we've written 20 books together about Pendergast, trying to tune them to our own talents. So, if Doug happens to be very good at writing, well, I can't think of what he's good at writing, but I'm sure there's something.
Articles and pronouns, right?
That's my fear, the 500 people talking, not Doug. What happens is we talk in great detail in advance. In the case of Bloodless, Doug would take, for example, the subplot of the documentary filmer who's down there doing a really cheesy documentary about demon-haunted Savannah, while I might take the subplot of Constance, Pendergast's ward, getting to know the reclusive owner of the hotel they're staying in. And these both tend to evolve and grow over time, and we run into problems, and then we call each other up and say, hey, Doug, I'm stuck here. Or more frequently, Doug calls me up and says, Link, I'm stuck here. And at that point, we brainstorm. And the funny thing is, I may be stuck on a point and be worrying about it for a day. And I'll call Doug finally, and he'll have the idea instantly to solve everything. It was probably there all along, and I just was too proud to call him up until late. And that's one of the miracles of how our partnership has come together. It took a long time to weave this magic, but it really is a magic thing. And we can both say that since we write solo books as well as joint books.
Well, I might add about our writing system is that Lincoln and I live thousands of miles apart. And this all occurs long distance. And when Lincoln and I get together, we break out a nice bottle of single malt scotch, and we sit around and we tell each other what fine fellows we are, and we complain about this and that, and absolutely no work gets done. So it's very important that we live thousands of miles apart, because that's the only way work would ever get done.
That sort of leads me to my next question, which is, how has this partnership that you just described, this sort of back and forth, this going off on your own with the various sequences of the book, how has that evolved over time? I mean, it's not just 20 books, it's just 20 Pendergast books, and then I think additional books on top of that you all have written together. There's another new series, the Nora Charles series. When you started this, was it sort of like, were you just drinking too much scotch together, or was there more arguing and less division of labor?
Well, it started
drinking scotch back then than there is now. I'm sorry, Doug, go ahead.
Well, all right. I don't want to dominate here, but it was a very peculiar. Our partnership started in a very peculiar way. Link was my editor for my first book, which was a nonfiction book, a very serious book called Dinosaurs in the Attic, which was a history of the Museum of Natural History in New York. And at the end of it, Link said, look, I want to tour this museum. I mean, I want the behind the scenes tour. So I gave him a tour, but because I was just a lowly employee, we had our tour at midnight after the museum was closed. And we ended up in the Hall of Late Dinosaurs, and Lincoln turned to me and he said, Doug, this is the scariest goddamn building in the world. We have to write a thriller set in this building. And I said, but Lincoln, I have no idea how to write a thriller. And he said, well, I do, because I edit thrillers for St. Martin's Press, and I've read so many bad thrillers that I know exactly what not to do. And then, so we started writing Relic, and Lincoln would tell me what not to do. And it turns out that that was extremely valuable advice, because I wanted to do all the things that you shouldn't do. And I think that's why Relic was successful, because Lincoln guided us into the right path.
Well, so I have to ask the next question. Lincoln, are you still essentially the editor of the two today? Do you take the red pen and strike out the extraneous words, or do you have a more sort of, let's say, authoritative voice when it comes to the whole process?
I try not to. What happened was, when I was very young, I loved to write, but when I got into publishing, having manuscripts cross my desk every single day, and just, you can't help but read a lot of bad ones as well as the good ones. And the fact that every other editor cynically had the great American novel under their bed, or so they thought, because they knew just how to plug in A, B, C, and D, and I'm sure to get the entire audience in America, reading. It shriveled my own interest in writing, and I got slower and slower and worse at it. Although I was pretty decent at telling other people what to do. And then when it came to writing Relic together, Doug and I was initially the editor more than I was a writing contributor, and I would suggest long chapter outlines to Doug, and then he would write a great deal of them, and I would edit them to his annoyance, and my contribution was, closer to 25-30% probably, in terms of first draft writing. But watching Doug turn my notes and ideas into prose, and he really is a facile writer. I mean, he's very good. Relic in particular, we had a lot of fun with, because we never thought anybody in the right mind would publish it. So it was really very indulgent book for us. But I got to watch the process of Doug, and in that process, my own logjam broke, essentially. And so now it's much more of a 50-50 partnership. And what happens is, rather than me trying to insert my my long atrophied editorial dominance, whoever yells loud enough wins the argument. And as work, we go talk to our editor and present both cases. And he pronounces his Solomon-like judgment on it, but that rarely happens. We trust each other now enough so that it doesn't come to blows as often as it used to.
Well, that's good. Okay, I have an agenda with this next question, and obviously, as with all of them, it's for both of you. But I want to ask you specifically, Link, why did you think nobody in their right mind would publish Relic?
Because the first, I'll tell you, there are two answers to that question. The first answer is because the proportion of bad manuscripts to good manuscripts that crossed to my desk was so high, I realized that lots of people out there think they can write, and it's possible that with training they could, but most don't get the kind of training they need, or someone looking over their shoulder to say, do it this way, not that way. And I was self-aware enough to know that I might be part of that 99%, so that 1%. And the second thing that was a real awakening to me was, because I was in the industry, I knew a lot of publishers, I knew a lot of agents in particular. And so when it came time for Doug and I to submit our book to an agent, which is really important if you can do it, I had a lot of friends who were agents, and I could be sure we'd at least get a reading, even if nothing else. And the first two agents, who were friends of mine who read it, turned it down. And that was when I really felt, the karma of all my declines of manuscripts wheeling around on a pivot and coming to crush us.
Doug, did you have the same anxiety that it would never get published? Did you think it was a hard sell, Relic, originally?
No, I had another anxiety that it would get published and would ruin my reputation as a writer. And initially, I said to Lincoln, "Look, I thought of myself as a very serious nonfiction writer." And so I said to Lincoln, "Look, I'm not going to put my name on this book. I'm having a blast writing it, but don't put my name on it." And so Lincoln went out and found this agent, not my agent. I had an agent already. And this agent put my name on the book without Lincoln or me knowing. And then he did the worst thing he could have done. He sent it to my editor at Simon & Schuster, Michael Korda, who had a very dry sense of humor. So I got a call from Michael Korda. I was supposed to be writing another book for him, a very serious nonfiction book. He called me up and he said, "Doug, I have an amazing coincidence to report. There's another Douglas Preston out there circulating a manuscript about a brain-eating monster in a museum. Isn't that funny?" "It is a coincidence, isn't it?" And I said, "Well, Michael, let me explain. He said, no. I want you to listen to something very important and instructive." And so I was listening on the phone and I heard this whoomp sound, very loud. It startled me. I thought maybe he'd fallen down. I said, "Michael, what was that? Are you all right? What was that?" He said, "That was your manuscript entering the wastebasket."
Oh
That
my!
was how I was rejected. So I called
Wow.
up Lincoln and I said, "This is an outrage. I can't believe this agent that you've got put my name on it and sent it to my editor. So I take my name on. I mean, I don't even want the money. Just go finish the novel yourself." And so Link went out, and I didn't hear anything for 3 months. And then he called me up and he said, "Doug, my agent has gotten an offer on the manuscript. Would you like to hear how much it is?" I said, No, I don't. "Well, maybe I do. How much?" And he named the price. And I said, oh my God, send me half the money and put my name back on."
And I said, "Too late. You're screwed." And the rest
Too late. I have your signature forfeiting your
Yep.
ownership share.
Husband
Wow,
beat
what a
like
story.
in New Mexico now, and he would have written 5
Yeah.
books, and shrunk to a little bitty. Not. Oh, and Doug, be
Yeah.
sure and tell Christopher the other half of that story, which is what your wife said when you were haranguing her about how I was forcing you to work on this disgusting, thriller meant for the lowest common denominator of reader.
Yeah, I really, I grew up with a highly inflated sense of the kind of writer I would become. A Nobel Prize, Pulitzers, not even the Pulitzer, Nobel, and you're a teenager and you think you dream big. And so I had this really elevated idea of what kind of books I was going to write. And it turns out I love writing these books with Lincoln. I mean, they are such a blast. They're fun to write. And actually, I do think that they have some literary value, especially in the Latin phrases that Lincoln inserts into the book. But anyway, so what did my wife say? Oh, I gave her 2 manuscripts to read. The book I was writing for Michael Korda, a very serious book, and then Relic. And she read both of them back to back. And she came to me and said, "Doug, I don't want to butt into your writing career or anything, but this book, Relic, is really, I couldn't put it down. I mean, oh my God, it's so good." And I said, "Well, what about the other one, Talking to the Ground?" She said, "Oh, well, that's fine. That's a fine book. That's very nice. Yes. But Relic, oh my God, I couldn't put it down." And she said, "You got to write some more books like that."
I love that story. I love that story. Yes.
I'm sorry. Before we go on, I don't want anybody listening to think at all that when I mentioned the lowest common denominator, I'm serious. I'm all serious. We have probably the readers with the best taste, and because when we don't write down, we write to not that we're geniuses, of course we're not, but we write the kind of fiction that we think we would like to read. And a lot of writers typically don't do that. They write what they think the public will read. And our readers respond to that. They like the jokes we put in. They like the fact that we push things to the edges. So we have the best readers in the industry. So thank you all.
Mhm.
Yes,
Absolutely.
we
Big
do.
thank
I mean,
you to their readers. Yeah.
our plots are very complicated, and we
Mhm.
do outrageous things in the books. I mean, Bloodless, probably more than any Pendergast novel, is, you know, well, demented, outrageous. I mean, it's
Mhm.
very, very interesting and fun. And we do love the English language. We treasure it, and we hope that we don't mangle it too badly.
So sorry, Chris, didn't
You
mean to
do not.
interrupt.
You do not. No, no, no. I absolutely. And I thought the stories that you guys just told were wonderful illustrations of the pretentiousness that we can sometimes encounter in the publishing industry, because we love stories about brain-eating monsters, and because we believe that going on a journey into stories like that can reveal things about ourselves as human beings that are worth discovering. That I think there is a place for every type of fiction out there, but a lot of people hate our type of fiction because it makes so much money, and that makes them angry, and they would like a different type of book to enjoy more market share than it does. And I think we should occasionally try to break out of our comfort zones as readers, for sure. But I also think that I heard a writing coach once say that you're writing the right thing for you if you have a physical sensation that's pleasant around the idea. And for her, it was the back of her neck. She would start to feel a warmth on the back of her neck, and that's when she knew she was writing the thing that she should be writing. And we don't have to get too detailed about your physical sensations, but I think we've all got one. And it's, if you're not feeling it kind of here, it doesn't matter if it's the most sophisticated idea or you think it's going to be the most marketable idea. It's probably unlikely that you as a writer can give your whole soul to it. So I think your whole soul is definitely in these books. And I think the leading part of the question that I asked, and we sort of got there, was that you all have conquered this this, I don't want to call it a trap, but a barrier to a lot of writers who get told, your work is great, but it's a little bit too much one genre and a little bit too much another genre at the same time. I've heard a lot of writers who got shut down on that basis when they submitted their manuscript. But you all have conquered this, I don't want to call it a gray zone, I want to use a term more flattering than that, joining of thriller and science fiction in a way that I think has really contributed to your popularity, that your books feel very grounded and there's a lot of science in them, but you push at the boundaries of what's real, or what's known, I should say. And in Bloodless, you really push. I mean, it's really entertaining. So I'm trying to ask this next question in the least pretentious way possible. Do you follow the science that you're obsessed with to a new idea? Or do you get a new idea and then you go out looking for the most plausible scientific explanation for that idea? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
It makes sense. I think we should both answer, because the answer is both. What, Doug, you want to start?
Well, I think, yeah, Lincoln and I are always trolling for ideas, and we find them in the weirdest places, in Scientific American, some in medical journals, weird places. We don't really find good ideas in the mainstream press. We don't find them in the New York Times, but we find them in out of the way places and they're scientific ideas or medical ideas. Like, for example, with the old bones, we have been thinking for years about how to take the science of prion disease and make a thriller out of it. Now, prion disease is really horrible. It's a disease that makes you go crazy. But it's, how do you get from an idea to a plot? That's always very challenging. So sometimes we go from the science and backfill it, and sometimes we go to the idea and then backfill the science.
Mm-hmm.
One thing we also try to do, at least I try to do, because Doug is naturally a polymath when it comes to science, is to pick a topic that I find interesting. I may know a little bit about it, but it's something I'd like to learn more about myself, and then in exchange pass that on to the reader, whether it be archaeology in a book like Thunderhead, or engineering in Ice Limit, or there are many other examples, because I think it's really nice when we get emails from readers saying, not only was I entertained, but I learned something about a discipline I didn't know anything about before. Thanks. So we take advantage of what we know about, but we also try and learn as well. In other words, no idea will scare us just because it means we have some research to do in order to pull it off.
Yeah, one of the
When you're
things
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, Christopher. I mean, I'm a big fan of your work, by the way. I love the Burning Girl series. It's really,
Thank you.
talk about terrifying. And
Yeah.
the title of your book, Bone Music, I saw that and I thought, damn, I wish I'd thought of that title. That's such a good title. But how do you develop your ideas, which are pretty unusual as well? I mean, there's nothing normal or ordinary about your novels either.
No, and I think I didn't write paranormal for the longest time, which is a sort of loose and maybe not entirely accurate description of it, because I wanted to be able to achieve what you all achieved, which is if it was going to be kind of an out there idea, I wanted it to feel like it had a groundedness, a basis in some form of science, even if it edged into science fiction. But I knew I wanted to write a book about a woman who, if you made her angry, she could just throw you through a wall. And that was how Burning Girl began. But I always tell the story, and I'll tell the shorter version of it. For some reason, when the idea first came to me, it involved aliens. And I would pitch the story to people, and I would say, yeah, the serial killer gets this woman in his clutches, and you think it's going to be a terrible scene of torture, and then she has this burst of super strength and throws off her restraints and grabs him by the neck, and it's this wonderful reversal, and the victim becomes the powerful, and everyone would be like, that's great, how did she get her power? And I would say, aliens. And they would go, why? Why? So finally I had lunch with an editor and my best friend Eric Shaw Quinn, whose book is actually behind me, who I do my podcast with, and he said, make it a drug. He said, bring it down here on Earth, because when you set yourself up, and I'm sure you've maybe had moments like this where you set yourself up with something that demands that you go so far out onto a spaceship, if you introduce aliens, it takes over part of your story that you might be wanting to devote to your characters and to the juice of the center of the idea. And so it really freed me up. And so that I went backwards. I went idea to the science, and then that took me on a journey that was about the neuroscience of aggression and really how little we know about the brain. That's what's always so amazing, is that you read lines like every generation just comes up with metaphors for the brain that match the most advanced technology of the time, right? People used to talk about the brain as being like a steam engine. Then they talked about it like a microchip. And now we talk about it like neural networks, because our understanding of technology sometimes seems to outpace our understanding of the brains in our head. So that's how it went for me. But I appreciate you asking, and you were definitely an inspiration when I decided to write stuff that pushed at the boundaries of reality.
Well, you must have also been inspired by your mother's novel.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. And I will tell you, you were inspired, but she had a Michael Korda story. And I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for telling this, but Michael Korda was submitted the manuscript for Interview with the Vampire, and apparently responded to the agent with a note. I don't see this at all. Lunch? Question mark. That was his entire response. So you were not the only one who heard the thunk, if you will. But I think what I learned from her was what I think you said earlier, which is you have to write the book that you want to read, right? You have to. So many writers get caught up in I have to be important, or I have to win an award, or I have to write to market. I think it's always a great feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong, when you feel like there's a part of the market that is lining up with what you're obsessed with. I think when the Stieg Larsson books became very popular, I thought, oh, this is good for me, because I love strong heroines who kick tail, if you will. So it was great. But sometimes the market goes in a direction and you're like, yeah, I don't know if I can go there. I'm not really excited about thrillers about bad marriages.
I know, me too.
Yeah. So the next question that I wanted to ask you guys, and then I think we may want to shift over to take some questions from the audience, because I know we had, I think, 10 before we even started, and that will bring Jennifer back in. But you write books on your own. You write books that are about Pendergast, and then you write non-Pendergast books. when it comes to the science, right? Like if you're out there trolling or you find an article in Scientific American, do you make a decision kind of on the spot? Okay, I think this is a Pendergast book. No, it doesn't feel like it's right for him. I think it belongs over here. How do you guys shuttle? And do you ever have moments where Link says, I'm taking this one? You know, it seems like an interesting division of labor there.
It's never come to the point where I've had to say well, yes, it did come to that point actually. But more to your question, what happens is the Pendergast books are almost always about serial killers, when either obviously or not, and so that the stories that end up being about being right as vehicles for Pendergast are stories that tend to have a lot of atmospherics attached to them. Whether it's a place like Savannah or a bizarre event. All these bodies turning up without any blood in them. And Doug and I will usually start with an idea, just a turn, what if we have all these feet washing up on the beach in Sanibel, Florida, and from there, we go on and unspool the tale. Whereas if we get an idea, oh my God, we have to write a book set in Oak Island, for example, or a book where a vaccine for the flu, which in our second book, Mount Dragon, became a terrible thing, then that requires the science, and we can give that to one of our other characters who are always eager for us to fling them some meat if Pendergast doesn't get there first. And only in one case did we disagree on an idea so much that we didn't write it together, and that was when I insisted on us writing a thriller in a theme park, and Doug said, "Oh no, I don't want to do that. That's terrible." And that became my first solo novel. But other than that, we've always agreed on ideas, and we tend to have several percolating. I wanted to add one thing to what you said earlier about the audience, and we've been very lucky. And Christopher, I hope you found this to be the same for you, in that we found the audience out there that appreciates our books, and we can write for that audience. We're still trying to write for the Hollywood people. They seem to be very elusive, but maybe that day will come sometime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are elusive, and they are in dramatic transition in a business sense, in a corporate sense, in a distribution sense. So the old rules may all be off the table about what works, or these digital streamers are discovering things about audience behavior that is smashing the conventional wisdom. I mean, just a few years ago, you would have studio heads telling you that a superhero film with a black male lead would never perform in China. And now we have Black Panther as a monster hit in China. So you can take all of the dismissive, glib things you might have heard from a Hollywood executive over the years and anticipate that they might be proved wrong and something might be moving ahead. You just never know. I think the only thing to keep in mind about Hollywood is the William Goldman line: nobody here knows anything. Period. That's great. Well, Doug, do you want to add to the work process conversation before we go over to some questions from the readers?
No, I think we're ready for questions. Sometimes our best, discussions are after we get good questions.
Well, and we have some wonderful questions from the audience. First of all, just thank you three so much. This has been absolutely riveting and fascinating. And thank you for being so generous and sharing so much. I do want to go on record as saying that Michael Korda is a very well-respected and distinguished editor and writer. But I don't want us to be appearing to bash him unnecessarily because he's done a lot of good work, right?
Yes. And I love Michael Korda. He's a very a person I admire tremendously, and I think he would appreciate the story that I told and not be offended. That's all I can say. I hope, Michael, if you're listening, that was all in good fun. And
thank you for that backpedaling. Thank you.
I think it would be appreciated in the spirit in which it was offered. I just wanted to make sure that we are all. I'm not sure our audience all knows who Michael Korda is, and so I want to make sure everybody knows he's he's made a few mistakes apparently, but he's still a very, very distinguished editor. So we have some great questions, and I'm just going to run through them kind of in order. And I have one of my own toward the end. But Gwen, who's been very active in our audience tonight, says the backstory that reveals a little more in each novel is pure genius. Was that a conscious decision, or did it evolve organically?
Doug, how about if we bounce off the questions? I'll answer one, then you'll answer one.
Yeah, you answer this one. That's a very good question, by the way.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gwen.
Yay, Gwen.
Yeah, shout out to Gwen. It was an organic, unconscious process at first. For example, when we wrote Relic, we never intended to have a series character. Even when we wrote the sequel, Reliquary, that just was, a bit of luck to us because we left Relic dangling. But then several books went by with sliding sales, and we decided to write Cabinet of Curiosities just on a lark, which brought Pendergast back. And we mentioned in passing in that book that he crossed in his mind in what we call a memory crossing. He went through his childhood house and he passed the door of his brother's room, which was nailed shut in his imagination. And I just stuck that in just as a tease, so readers would gnash their teeth and wonder what it was. But it began the whole story of Diogenes without us knowing it, and ever since, it has not been organic. It has been very carefully thought out, not to the point that we actually have it planned ahead, 5 or 10 books. In fact, we have a lot of characters who were detritus, who we have left behind and we need to bring back. But yes, the Pendergast backstory is something we are nurturing now and trying to keep interesting and fresh in every new book.
So that leads kind of to my next question, or to the next question, which is, there's always this question of pantser versus, excuse me, for some reason I'm getting an echo. Given the nature of the writing that you do you outline together, or do you pants it, as we say? Are you pantsers or planners? We do plan carefully, but not completely meticulously.
What we do is we get an idea and we talk about it and argue, and it goes on sometimes for weeks. And then finally we arrive at sort of a narrative of the novel, and we write that down. It may only be 10 or 15 pages. But it's general. We try not to be too specific, because characters hijack the story, or the story goes off in different directions. We're halfway through writing. We might have a better idea, and we don't want to be too planned. We want to sort of discover the story as we write it, which is part of the pleasure of writing, because we want the reader to feel that they're discovering the story as they're reading it. So what we'll do is, we'll have this narrative, and then we'll plan the first 15 chapters, and then Lincoln will write a set of those from one character's point of view, and I'll write a set from the other. And then he rewrites me, and I rewrite him, and we put them together, and then we do the next 15 chapters. But we try not to lock ourselves into a pre-planned plot, although we do know where we're going. It's sort of like we're on top of a mountain, and there's a valley filled with fog, and there's another mountain peak in the distance. And we know that we've got to climb that mountain out there, but we don't quite know the paths in this misty valley that we're going to follow.
That was a very good answer.
Writer.
Lincoln, would you add anything to that?
No, I don't think I can follow that metaphor up with anything, remotely up to par, except that we do take turns leading each other into that fog, because now and then when Doug's ahead and I hear a splash, I know he stepped into the mire. And we often do liken it to a traveler on a road, and people often ask us what's the difference between the solo books that we've written and the joint books we've written. And one of the biggest differences is when we get to a fork in the road, if you're a solo writer, as most people are, right, Christopher? I know you've written with your mom, but you get to a fork in the road and you're not sure which fork is the right one to take, particularly when 10 forks later, you may realize that that one you took is wrong. And it's really nice for me to be able to call up Doug and say, do I go left or right here? And you can't do that with your own book. I mean, your own book, of course, has its own set of pleasures and accomplishments, but it doesn't have a partner. And writing's a lonely business.
Thank you. Sydney would like to know when the remaining 2 novels in this series will be published. Can't wait.
Well, we are working on the next one. We're already, how many chapters into it, Lincoln?
8.
8. It is going extremely well. We have already told our publisher that we're going to submit the manuscript 2 months in advance. So we're trying to get it to you as quickly as possible. And believe me, this is really going to be a wonderful novel. I'm very excited by it.
I'm sorry, should we, to the special audience, should we share where the location where the last chapter was written? The store?
Sure, go ahead.
Constance walks into Tiffany's. I know that sounds like the beginning of a joke, right? But it's not. The last chapter we wrote was Constance goes into Tiffany's to sell a whole bunch of diamonds. And I'll leave it at that.
Well, I'm going to say that I'm very excited to hear that because, of course, the Mark Twain House has quite a bit of Tiffany glass. And Lou's Comfort Tiffany and Associated Artists were hired to do the interior decor for the Mark Twain House when they did that during the Clemens family's tenure there. So we're excited about that connection.
Let me just say something. Lincoln and I have both done programs at the Mark Twain House. It is absolutely fabulous.
Gorgeous.
Those of you out there who have not been to the Mark Twain House, who love American literature, it's a place you must see. It is the most gorgeous, beautiful house, and it's so full of literary meaning and importance to American literature. So definitely visit.
Well, thank you for that. And while we're talking about it, let me just say that if you're not able to get here in person, particularly because of COVID, if you go on our website, you can take a 3D virtual reality tour of the Mark Twain House, and you can see every single inch of it that way. So a good tide you over anyway. So will you guys come back and do a book launch for us for the next one?
Couldn't keep us away.
Oh, yay. But we have more questions, so let's keep going. And Jim says, I can never predict what will happen next in your books. What challenges do you face when writing plots that end in such spectacular settings and scenarios? And Jim, I think you might want to be a writer too. That was a really well-written question.
Okay. I'm terribly sorry. I guess the tennis court was in my side of the court that time. You know, it's funny because we always, as Doug said, we plan our novels ahead, but we don't ever plan it all the way to the end because we want to make sure it stays an organic entity, you know, and I think we would have missed out on a bunch of real opportunities had we done that, because especially with two of us writing and two of us going home at the end of the day with our work pails, you know, to think about what we're doing. You know, it's quite frequently one will sit bolt upright at night and say, oh my God, why are we doing this when we could go in this direction? And so, you know, the problem is not only what the most satisfying story is when you close the book, but it's also making it seem to the reader as if that was the inevitable place we had to get to. And it was set that way, you know, from page one. And I don't know what's more difficult, figuring out how to get to the end, or figuring out how to make it look easy.
Doug, would you add anything to that excellent answer?
No, I think Lincoln answered that one pretty well.
Thank you.
Now, here's a question after my own heart from Paul, who's taking us down a different path a little bit. Do you have a favorite single malt that you pull out for special occasions?
Well, that's a
Yes.
question I'm very happy to answer.
And Christopher, we'd like to hear your answer to this as well. So
the Macallan is, I think, my favorite, and it's so much a favorite of mine, and I think Lincoln also appreciates it, that we use that name in our book Riptide for the great architect of the well, I don't want to spoil the book, but there is a 18th century architect named Macallan whose work is featured prominently in Riptide.
Christopher, how about you?
Well, I've retired from the single malt business, but before I did, it was Balvenie. I don't even know if it's a single malt, but it was Scotch. It was Balvenie. But today I'm more of an Earl Grey kind of guy.
No.
Blame a childhood in New Orleans for my teetotaling nature. I had a lot of single malts, and now I don't.
Earl Grey is awesome.
It is. I think Doug was looking through the bottom of a Macallan bottle when he had the idea for Riptide. But my favorite is Lagavulin, 18-year-old Lagavulin, and it's a kind of single malt you have to sort of work your way up to, but it was worth the climb, and that's all I'll say about it.
Well, thank you for sharing those preferences with us. Ren says, Douglas, I heard your lecture supporting the lost city of the monkey god at the American Museum of Natural History. You said you and the team contracted an illness. How are you feeling now?
Well, I'm feeling fine. Thank you for asking. Leishmaniasis was the illness. It's a very awful tropical disease. I would not advise those of you listening to Google that and look at the pictures. Don't do it. And it's not curable either. But I've gotten wonderful treatment at the NIH, and thanks to Dr. Fauci, who is head of the department of the NIH that I was being treated at. And so I'm doing very well, thanks. And if you're going to get a disease, that's an interesting one to get because it's the oldest disease we know of. They have found amber, 100-million-year-old amber with sandflies in it that suck the blood of a dinosaur which had leishmania parasites in the blood. So dinosaurs got leishmaniasis.
Leave it to you to get the disease of the oldest fart was ever to get,
Are you going to write about that? That's fascinating.
I did. I wrote about it in The Lost City of the Monkey God.
Okay,
and,
I'm sorry.
Really gruesome. It's I don't advise reading that book before dinner.
There's a reason we don't see him from the waist down right now. Let's put it that way.
So Sydney again wants to know, what are the Easter eggs you referred to? He says last night. I'm not sure what that refers to. Does that resonate with you?
Yes. I don't know how we got onto the topic, but we began talking about various things we embed in the book for ourselves. Doug mentioned in a most tortuous way that I put a lot of foul words and scenes in the books that he had to take out. And I retorted by saying that he had put in a few little Easter eggs, little double entendres that had slipped by me and slipped by the editor and made it into print. And that we were going to leave it to the reader to find them. And apparently this reader heard that conversation and is intrepidly calling our bluff. I don't have anything more to say. Doug said them. Do you want to answer that?
No, we don't want to direct anyone to those Easter eggs. They are too awful.
Oh, no, okay.
We're very sorry. As an excellent question, and no one's ever asked us that before.
Well, we have time, I think, for just one more question, I think. And a number of people want to know, and you mentioned this about Hollywood, but is there any hope of film versions? And Tony is saying, may I suggest Anderson Cooper as Pendergast if there's ever a TV series? So any updates or news that you could share along the lines of TV or movie versions?
Well, it's kind of a sad story. The problem is that when Paramount bought the rights to Relic, they acquired the rights to all the characters in the book. And even though they cut Pendergast out of the movie, they still have rights to his character, and they will not release those rights. So the only outfit that can make a Pendergast movie or television series is Paramount. And they did try. They hired a writer who did a wonderful pilot and a series Bible, and it went to one executive at Paramount who passed it. It went higher to the next executive who thought it was wonderful, and it finally got up to the top executive who said, nope, don't like it, and killed it.
Oh, dear.
That was it.
How long ago was this, Douglas? How many years ago do you remember?
That was about 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't it, Link? 2, 3 years ago?
Yeah, 4 years ago, I think. Yep. We will add Anderson Cooper to the list. It's funny, that's a very common question. And as we get older, the actors that we suggest tend to age out. You know, at one time it was Christopher Walken, and then it was Matthew McConaughey, and then it was the fellow who plays Sherlock Holmes with the 17 syllables, Benedict Cumberbatch. And now a lot of people are mentioning the guy who plays Loki as a possibility.
Oh.
So
Tom Hiddleston, right.
Yeah.
So, you know, bring it on. You know, all we need is the pilot and the green light, and we'll consider any and all comers, including Anderson.
Do you think a letter writing campaign, if we harnessed everybody in our audience tonight to write to Paramount?
I hate to be an agent provocateur. I don't know what to say to that, Doug.
Well, if we had a name we could give you, maybe we could get all the trolls, all the Pendergast trolls out there to go to work and convince him. But, you know, the problem is with Paramount is that they won't sell his character rights either. And the reason is because if they sell his character rights and someone else makes a very successful series, the person who let those rights go is going to be fired. So they won't make the series and they won't sell the rights, even though there's a huge interest out there among other studios in doing a series, a television series. But
if I could just add one thing to that for our listeners and watchers, if you're ever watching Amazon Prime or Netflix or Hulu or it doesn't matter what station, and you're watching a long form series and you turn it off after 2 episodes and say, oh, that just wasn't all that good. Just think of Doug and I feeling the same thing. And then the next sentence is, how come that isn't us up there?
Well, I don't want to end on a negative note at all. I want to thank you, all three of you, for just a fascinating and fun conversation. We can't wait to hear what all three of you come up with next. And we do expect you to remain dear friends of the Mark Twain House. You know, we always say that the Mark Twain House is a writer's home and a home for writers. And you three are already members of our family of writers. So we're thrilled to have you there. I can't remember. Did we give you a Mark Twain bobblehead doll when you came before?
yes, you did. And I got it in my bathroom, right next to the bathtub.
In your bathroom. That's new
Yes.
by me. Christopher, do you have one of these?
If you gave us one, my mother stole it.
Okay,
So no,
well,
I don't have my own Mark Twain bobblehead doll. I'll just put that out there.
okay, we're going to take care of that for you because that just can't
Excellent.
stand.
Yes, send me one too, because Doug stole the one you gave to us.
It does not surprise me one bit. Honestly. So we're getting close to closing time here. I do want to thank you all again. I want to thank our audience who's just been so generous with questions and active in our chat and very enthusiastic. It really gives you hope that this whole pandemic thing, we've still stayed connected and still had a lot of interesting things to talk about and think about. And I also want to remind people, a lot of you have indicated in the chat that you have already made this purchase. Thank you so much for that. And please do remember, it's going to take us a little bit of time. We're going to be a little bit overwhelmed. We're very short-staffed, and we're going to be putting signed book plates in these books as fast as we can and shipping them out. So please do be patient with us. And I also thank you to all of you who have clicked that donate button. Really, really appreciate it, and we really love your support. So I'm going to say good night now, and thank you all again for doing this with us, Lincoln and Doug and Christopher, and please don't be strangers.
Before you do that, I want to say on behalf of Doug and myself, thank you. Jennifer, Christopher, thank you so much, Doug.
Absolutely.
And also thank you to the Mark Twain House. We'd love you. We can't wait to come back. You're so kind to have us here. And also to our readers, thank you so much. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be here.
Yes.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Jennifer.
I second all those sentiments.
Well, thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a quick shout out to my colleagues, Jacques Lamar and Mallory Howard, who are really great colleagues and were really instrumental in making this evening happen. So thank you, Jacques and Mallory, for doing that too. So everybody go and have a good evening, and thank you again, and buy this book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.